Hello, guys. It's strange to see yourself at such a big screen, so happens not too often. Welcome at my presentation. As him already told, I'm Sergej, and I'm from Germany, Hamburg, and I'm working for the company called XING. Maybe some of you already have heard about it. A couple of words about the company that you know about. Just a sec. No, doesn't work. Next. Right, just a sec. And again. Yeah, just stepping on the. Okay. About a couple of words about the company. So the company was founded in 2003, almost at the same time with famous LinkedIn company. So nobody has stolen anything from anybody. The idea appeared into several minds at the same time in the several countries. So company is since 2006 already as a listed company on the market, and we are working mainly in the German-speaking countries, so Austria, Switzerland, and Germany, of course. And headquarter is in Hamburg, but we have several offices in Munich, Barcelona, Porto, Vienna, and some other offices also. So the company is pretty big. We have over 1,000 employees and over 200 developers. So you can imagine it's a big development power, and we have to deal with it and we have to scale it. So how did it start? The native development started, I think it was at the beginning of the 2010, because the first app appeared in April of 2010. So you see we are developing mobile pretty long time already in the company, so it's over 8 years. And how the development setup looked like. At this time, there were not so many developers, as you saw just on the slide, but few of them. And the development setup looked pretty easy. So we had backend. In the backend, there were several apps, so like profile, contacts, messages, jobs, and so on and so on. And on every of these applications, one team worked, one agile team. They worked mainly on the backend and web frontend. API, that was one of these applications. So at XING, we are calling it XWS, so XING Web Services, and the mobile applications there communicated with the backend via this API. And actual mobile development team was pretty small. We had only 2 iOS developers and 2 Android developers, QA, PO, and all the roles needed for the development of the mobile applications. And they kind of maintained, planned, and did everything what is related to the mobile development for the iOS and Android applications. How the releases looked like, it was actually pretty easy because we just developed some features. It doesn't matter how long did it take. So for some features it took 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. So depending on that, the development cycle took its time. And then after the phase of the active development, we had a phase of the active testing. It doesn't mean that we didn't test before, because before the guy who worked in the mobile team tested by himself, of course. But at the end, we had a phase of intensive testing with additional teams, with additional roles, which were included in this testing phase, so POs, developers, and QAs from the other departments, and so on. And then it followed by the phase which was kind of specific for the platform. So for Android, it was kind of already upload and releasing, and for iOS app, the phase of review in the Apple Store followed. It took up to 2 weeks, sometimes less, sometimes more. We were dependent on that. So, and after this, we released our app to the customer, and of course, the whole cycle continued. So you see, nothing, no rocket science, nothing complicated. So to summarize a bit, we had releases which were driven by the features which we developed currently. So and they also kind of decided how long the development phase took, and then product and release planning happened in one team, and we had only few releases per year. I think it was kind of 2, 3, sometimes 5 releases. At the very end, we kind of decided to try to do at least 1 release per month, but it didn't work out. So, of course, this setup was not ideal. We had a lot of challenges. So, like you've heard already, it took pretty long time until the features appeared in front of the customer. So, from the beginning of the development with this small mobile team, it took long time, 2-3 months, until one feature was shown to the customer. And also, we had, as you remember, at the very beginning, backend, there were several teams which kind of gave us their requirements. They wanted to have something from us, and we have to develop this application. So it means we had a lot of stakeholders, a lot of customers, and it was pretty difficult to prioritize the features. So that's why we started to think, how can we improve? And the first attempt to improve the mobile development and releasing of the applications, mobile applications, was the team split, which we performed in 2013. So we splitted the iOS and Android applications. So you see the rest of the setup still remained the same, but we had one iOS and one Android team, which were concentrating on developing of this application. So we could pay more attention to the platform-specific topics, so how the user behavior on iOS and on Android is, how specific they are, which should we implement where, and so on and so on. And also, we could decouple the platforms from each other, and every team could plan and perform their releases by themselves. At the end, we tried to kind of drive the concept that one team started with something new, so for example, Android, and iOS, which implemented the stuff afterwards, could profit from the learnings which the teams did in the first phase. So and we tried to exchange all the time, so we could profit. One team could profit from another team. The actual release didn't change at all. Just one slight difference, that one team was responsible for their releases, another team was responsible for their releases. They could be synchronized, that could be not synchronized, it didn't matter. So, but at some time we realized it doesn't work anymore. Why? The first thing was, probably you can imagine, with broader usage of the mobile devices, the mobile traffic on the platform also increased and increased a lot. So the mobile platform started to be not the side funny product anymore, so where the people can try a lot of new shiny things and so on and so on. It started to be essential for more of the teams because they wanted to get this traffic to them. Another thing was, as I said, we had a lot of product teams. And because of this increased traffic and because of this will to get their products into the mobile applications, they started to push more and more on the mobile team because they wanted to have their features inside. Another thing was, we did the so-called API unleashing. So if you think about the first slide, where API was kind of connection between the mobile applications and the backend. So before something could be implemented on the mobile applications, it should be implemented in the API. So they were the bottleneck at this time because they had to implement all the calls before, and then we could start with work. But after some time we saw that it didn't work anymore, so we tried to build something new, and it was so-called vendor API concept. So the main API team have built kind of wrapper, which was responsible for authorization and so on, handling handshake between application and the backend, and the actual kind of insights of the call. So what was important was done by the product team. So each team could develop their API calls by themselves, and they didn't have to care about this stuff like authorization and so on and so on. So, and the next thing was, as soon as we had to implement something in the on the mobile application, we had to duplicate the knowledge which already existed in the product teams. For example, if we implemented the new messenger function. So it was already in the domain team which was responsible for the backend and web frontend for messaging. They had the business logic and they had to transform it to us. So, and we had to kind of adapt it and repeat it. So it duplicated. And also scaling problems. Yeah, we couldn't handle so many requests anymore from the domain teams. And the next, I think, really important thing is the company wanted to introduce the so-called full stack product thinking. So what does it mean? Probably if you are a bit longer in the industry, you know how it works. So a lot of people think first web, they implement some features in the web, nice, shiny, and so on and so on. And they think afterwards, oh, how can we squeeze it on this small little screen? We have to adapt something. And they have to adapt the function. They don't think from the beginning on about the all screens, about the all sizes, about the typical use cases maybe which could be done on mobile, but they are just trying to copycat it on the mobile devices in small. So, and the company wanted to encourage the people and encourage the product owner to think from the beginning on about the whole stack of the platforms, and they had everything in their hand. So, yeah, it resulted in the so-called mobile unleashing. So what does it mean? You see, this picture is the same, but we implemented in every of the domain DSTs, I mean, not in every at the same time, but one team after another team, mobile developers. So they had their own iOS and Android developers. And they became responsible for their parts of the mobile applications. And they got, of course, with it the freedom because they had API in their hand, they had the mobile application in their hand, and they could plan and use their resources as good as they wanted to use it. Yeah, but another problem is if the application is developed in several teams, it's not a web application, so where everybody could release it by himself or herself on the platform. It should have been put in the same application back. So all these pieces have to be collected, and that's why we thought about how we can realize it, and we came out with a concept of the release train, which we introduced in our company. It was a pretty difficult process, but at the end we managed to do it and it still works. How did it look like? For iOS, we had following stages of the release process. So the first one was the phase of the active development. You see here, I brought it kind of 2 weeks because the most of the teams, they worked with Scrum with 2 weeks cycle. So we just thought it would be the most useful period of time for the active development. But actually the teams are independent. They can choose methodology whichever they want to. So some of the teams are using Kanban, some of the teams are using the Scrum with 1 week cycle. But the main thing at the end for them, the date where the actual code freeze happens, it is fixed kind of. They have to apply to this date. The next thing was because all teams worked the same application, there could be also side effects. So we had to organize the testing of the whole application again after the features were implemented and everything was merged to master, so kind of integration testing afterwards. And it took up to 2-3 days, working days, so we started normally at Friday and wanted to be done on Tuesday. Afterwards, we implemented the pre-release phase. It took kind of 1 week approximately. And we tested this application internally. So it means we had an internal iOS store, app store, not iOS, but app store. And in this store, we were able to distribute the application to all of the internal employees. And we restricted the usage of the live application to the employees. It means everybody who was employee at XING, he should use the iOS pre-release application and not the live application. So we could get an early feedback from the users and apply it already. And afterwards, the normal review process started and was kind of dependent on Apple restrictions. And the same circle started again. So nothing spectacular here. Here, don't be afraid. You don't have to read or understand or see what is written there. I tried once to display graphically how the mobile release with all dependencies to the domain teams works. And you see the picture was pretty complex with all of the events, with all of the days that should be synchronized and so on and so on. So it was also pretty complicated. But just to give you an impression of it. For Android, it looked almost the same, a bit different, but the first phase was development phase, so the same. But in the final testing stage also, but the first difference begins here. So instead of using of the pre-release stage for Android, we used the official Android beta testing. Why? Because in the company we had kind of mobile initiative, so every employee got for a certain time a mobile device, and the most of the users took, of course, iOS devices, you can imagine. So, and that's why the benefit from the pre-release phase, which we would get from internal testing on Android devices, would be pretty small because not too many users used Android applications. So that's why we used official beta program. And another thing that we did, different to the iOS, we did also the phased rollout. So it means we started at the beginning with different percentages. So we started with 1%, 2%, 5%, and so on, and tried to roll it out. But at the end, we realized it doesn't make sense. We don't get any valuable feedback. And the first one starts with 20%. So we had only a few phases, so 20%, 50%, and at the end, it was released to the 100%. So depending, of course, if the versions were okay. If not, we had to fix something. So, and also here, the same starts from the beginning. To perform this, we couldn't do it, of course, from one moment to another. We had to do some homework because it was a pretty complex process. So the first one was test automation. As you can imagine, in this process, the test automation gets high importance, I would say it like this. So we had to extend and adapt unit testing, also integration testing, acceptance testing, and visual testing also. And the setup of the teams was like one team took care about all platforms of some features. So, for example, I don't know, jobs. They take care about Android, iOS, web, and backend. The problem is we had several developers here, of course, for every discipline, but only one QA, which could or should take care about the quality of the this part of the application. It means if we would expect from them that they can do the test automation, for example, in Objective-C for iOS or in Java for Android and Ruby for the backend, it would be pretty, how would I say it, somebody who is standing pretty close to the Superman, because you have to perform all the other languages. You have to take care about everything. So we had to reduce the number of tools that we used and also reduce the number of languages that we used. So instead of using of KIF, Keep It Functional, I don't know if somebody heard about it, automation tool for iOS, and also Espresso and Robotics for Android, we use Calabash now, so it covers both platforms, and the people are able to write the tests in one language for their part of the application. So they have their domain knowledge, and then they can apply it in the test automation. And also we try to encourage the developers to automate more. And of course, team cooperation, because if you can imagine, if every team plans for themselves, they will be some clashes, definitely. So some priorities, some side effects which nobody thought about, and we had to organize it. We had to organize this exchange meeting that everybody knows from every team what is in the release and can think about the applications. And also, because so many teams could work independently from each other, you can imagine in every team there is a visual designer, UX designer, and everybody thinks, I can do it the best, I know how it works the best, and I don't care about the rest, they do it everybody wrong. So to avoid that the app looks like a Lego castle at the end and has a kind of similar look and feel, we had to introduce some design patterns and code patterns. And of course, the teams should understand that everything according to the feature is their responsibility. They're responsible for the development, they're responsible for planning, they're responsible also for the quality of the application. So all of these points, and actually also more of them, but I cannot mention everything, they were kind of prerequisites and they needed more love from the company and from every team. So to summarize it a bit, we had centralized releases but per platform, so iOS and Android different. And we had distributed asynchronous development, so every team could develop how they wanted to. They just had to be ready in time to one certain point of time. We increased the number of the developers in every for every platform, kind of, because several teams had their iOS and Android developers. And also we reduced the cycle from the start of the development of the feature until the feature sees the customer. So it started to be more regular, and we took approximately 4 weeks from the beginning of the development until we could release it to the customer. Also, this approach is not without challenges. So the first thing, as you've heard already, we have differences between iOS and Android. And if you imagine you are working in one of the domain teams and you have to deal with these differences, actually you would like to have everything the same, and only if it's really, really needed, you would like to have the differences. And also, because the Android phase, you saw that we had phased rollout, was so long, we had at least 2 versions in the different stages of the rollout phase overlapping, and it was not so good, because if you had to fix something, some bug or some crash which you identified on the platform, you had to fix several versions. And also we had to introduce mandatory tools and processes, which was not so easy because we had a lot of resistance from the teams. You can imagine developers want to have only their tools that they like, and then they don't want to have any restrictions what they should use and how they should use it. Yeah, so that's why, to solve at least a couple of these problems, the next step was introducing of the release team. So interesting trend, I would say here, it was kind of from the unleashing, so from the distribution of everything, we got back to one point. We introduced one release team, and this release team, so you see the rest is the same. Actually, we have the same structure. Platform teams are taking care about the how should I say it, basics of the platform. So for example, I don't know, menu or some architectural decisions. Domain teams are developing the features, but about the releases, about the planning of the release, about the building of the app together, about the definition of the process, how the development should happen, how all this sync of the apps should happen. This was taken over by the releases team. So they had all the near disciplines, so iOS, Android, backend, also QA for the test automation. And currently I'm leading this team, so we founded it just, I think, 1 year ago it was started. So it's 1 year old now. So to make it short, who is responsible for what? There was a lot of discussions. Who should do one task, another task, and so on. We decided that the platform teams and the domain teams, they're responsible for what is in the application, so of the content, how the feature should look like, how the app should behave, and so on and so on. And the releases team takes over the question how it should be organized. So what are the preconditions, for example, that the pull request can be merged from the branch to master, for example, or which test should be performed before the actual merge can happen, and so on. How did it influence our releases? So actually, you see, the most of the structure is remaining the same, but we combined some some phases. So you see the pre-release phase is starting now immediately after the active development phase. So during the testers are doing still the acceptance and integration testing, we already starting the pre-release phase. So internal employees already getting their application on the phones and can give the first feedback. Of course, we had to make sure first that the version is not too raw. So as the basics, we are expecting at least test automation being green for this application. Yeah, and the same, and you see we have less overlap there. For Android, it's also the same, and here it's, I think, more critical because beta users, that's our user who are already external users. So it's not internal employees anymore whom you could deliver probably more bugs, I would say, and you could expect more tolerance. That's already the people who signed for the beta program, but still there are people outside and they see the product. So it was a bit difficult to introduce it here, that we are starting the beta phase directly after we are done with development. And the main thing what we wanted to achieve, and we achieved, that we don't have any overlap in the rollout phases. So one version is rolled out to 100% and then the next version starts. So to summarize it a bit, we have centralized and unified releases team, which takes care about the releases on all platforms. So we also participate in the Windows a bit and speaking about another platforms currently. And we have a really distributed product development because we have now, I think the last state was about 12 or 13 domain teams which are located like through the world, Porto, Barcelona, Vienna, and they can contribute to the app. And we reduced the time from beginning of the feature development until it sees the customer to 3 weeks. So now it's we can perform more releases. That's what actually our product owners expect from us. Also there, because the process is pretty new and although it's pretty new, so you would expect if you are introducing something that it's kind of serving its duty without any problems, but still we have some challenges. So one thing is we had, and we have still the discussions. What is every team responsible for? Sometimes I have the feeling that everybody expects from my team that we are Supermans, that we can do iOS, Android, that we understand every product, that we know all the flows. So all questions are kind of coming to us and we have to kind of then distribute them to the teams. And also another thing is we did the experience, if we do not automate a lot of stuff, including how the releases are happening. A lot of teams are coming after the code with some, oh please, we need this and it's so important and so on and so on. So we try to automate as many things as possible so everybody knows the process runs independent on if you are done or not. Only in very urgent cases and with real need we kind of change this process. And another experience that we did, probably we did it or made it too easy for the teams. So we are kind of realizing there are more and more attempts just to get the deadline. So kind of squeeze the code inside of master before the code freeze with all efforts that they can bring in, and then afterwards relax. So we noticed that we have a bit raw code, that it's not really well tested sometimes, and that we are identifying the problems during the release phase. Not these problems which I would expect, for example, integration problems. So if one team is pushing something, another team is pushing something, there are some clash. Of course, I would expect that these problems will be found in this phase. But the problems which could be found earlier, I expect that the teams are finding them before they are merging the stuff. So there also a short kind of run through the evolution. So the first run was a single team. We had the single team which took care about the development, about the planning, about the product vision and everything, and also the releases. The second phase was the unleashing phase. So we tried to distribute and scale mobile development through the whole company, and also introduced two teams, iOS and Android team, to concentrate more on the platform specifica. And the current phase is we introduce the releases team, which takes care about the central stuff, tries to bound the stuff and the knowledge which is needed for putting all of these pieces together in one place. And we have regular releases with regular release trains, which are running currently every 2 weeks, but the actual rollout is after 3 weeks. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that we are done with our work. We still have kind of a lot of new experiments, a lot of open questions. So, for example, one of them is, I've told you that we are using patterns. So patterns means we have defined a lot of central components which can be used by the teams to be integrated in their parts of the applications. It means if somebody is changing these parts, we have a lot of testing effort, because the teams should verify if these changes which one of the teams did in this component didn't have any negative effect on their sections. So we call this process global improvement process. It's also a topic for itself, I would say, because we have always questions and problems with this process. Another one, the name Red Global Improvement is kind of unofficial name, because it was meant for the global improvements which affects everybody. So for example, something really architectural, so exchanging of the network stack, for example. So where the app is doing the communication to the outside world. It affects everybody. And how to deal with it? How should you sync the work with all of the POs, with all of the roadmaps which are planned for themselves, and bring them all together? So one time we did kind of red global improvement. So we merged everything, all these changes, and made the master being red. So that's why it's a red global improvement. So it's kind of questionable. Is it the right approach? Is it the wrong approach? On one side, it forces the people to take some actions to fix their stuff, because our processes says if you have red tests in your part of the application, you cannot merge anything new. So it means they had to take care about this stuff first until they were done, and then afterwards they could merge the new stuff that they wanted to put inside. But like I said, there are a lot of questions, and now we're discussing another thing, how we can implement it and so on. And another thing, hybrid content. I think a lot of applications are using kind of web content inside of their application, and it's difficult to integrate them into the process because they can change the things in the backend. They are not used to the mobile thinking because they have their own processes. And if I hear something from the POs, for example, which say, oh, in case we have a problem, we can do a rollback. For example, on mobile, there's no rollback. So people should realize it. It's kind of like you're burning the CD or DVD and then give it to the customer and they have to install it. And it happens all the time. You cannot force them to do it. And yeah, I think question which everybody of you faces kind of what happens. During the release, I found the bug. How to identify, is it important, is it not important? Should it be fixed or not? Should we involve everybody in the testing session or not? And so on and so on. And of course, delays. So what happens if one team is on the offsite, for example, for 3 days? You know, it's kind of the questions which we're solving daily, but somehow it works, but it's not the ideal process currently. And more and more and more. Yeah, I'm done for now.